From the broken ruins of Babylon, this is, and slow down. Got it going in a loop. Must have accidentally clicked that. Welcome back, everybody. Or should I say, I'm back. As you know, End of Days Radio has been off the air for quite a long time, and there are various reasons for that, from my failing health to legal issues to me just being bombarded by work. Lots of reasons why I've been off air for so long. But rest assured, I am doing a lot better now. I've taken certain measures to get myself a little bit healthier, and I've done some things to free up some time. And boy, I'm happy to be back. The past year has been awful. Not connecting with you guys, not doing a show. I probably needed some kind of break. I've been doing this show for over a decade, so I don't think a little year break is that big of a deal. But boy, has it taught me something. What it has taught me is how empty my life feels without this show, how boring things can get without this show. I mean, my whole life has revolved around this show and the various happenings, whether spectacular and normal or spectacular and supernatural, paranormal. It's all been focused around this show. And without it, boy, does Jack feel like a dull boy. But we are back. I'll get into more of that later. We're going to be doing a little bit of a different format. As many of you know, we had drifted into kind of a roundtable format. And there were a lot of complaints about people talking over each other, not enjoying the show. It was called too messy, things like that. So we're going to scale that back a little bit and just kind of get back to roots, get back to the art of the interview. The focus of this show has always been the interview. I've been complimented many times, telling me I'm good at interviewing. I hope that's true. But because of those reasons, I really want to get back to basics. I feel like we lost some people. I don't think everybody was into the party sort of format. And it was getting kind of ridiculous. It was going on for 4+ hours. That had a lot to do with my declining health, not getting enough of a rest. So we're gonna get back to basics, back to the quality content that we know that the audience out there loves. And besides that, the donations are back on. So not that they were ever off, but if you love End of Days Radio and you want to see it prosper, please donate. Help us keep the lights on and the servers up. You can go to endofdaysradio.com and click on the donate link. And of course, stay tuned after the interview for our news and current events. We're still going to do that. But we're not going to do a super long show anymore. I'll tell you that much. First and foremost, no more. I know a lot of you guys aren't going to like this because you love the long format, the 4 or 5 hour stuff, but I don't feel that that's the right way to do a podcast. First of all, people don't have that type of patience, and also for my health, again, I can't go on that long. I work a full schedule, so I know there's other podcasters and creators out there that somehow find a way to grift their way into a non 9 to 5 schedule where they get to do what they love all day long. I'd love to get there, hopefully without the grifting part. But until then, I'm a working boy. So conservatives out there, you should love me. I'm a working man, blue collar. But enough of that. Let's get on to our main event. Today, we are welcoming Paul Fredric. In his own words from his website, as a child of the 60s, I spent my life searching for truth in philosophy, religion, social sciences, and eventually occult and ceremonial magic. I went through the processes of several esoteric schools, but in the end, the most substantial thing that stuck with me was the practice of meditation. I discovered that the continued practice of meditation, following certain guidelines, can lead to the activation of a new process in the individual, something I call a second awakening. A second awakening. You hear that, folks? A second awakening. I invite you to join me on this journey. Once again, that's from his website. And introducing to everybody, we have Paul Fredric. Hello, sir.
Hey Daniel, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I first heard the End of Days podcast. Gosh, I'm not sure when, but y'all had on you had Michael Aquino on, and then you also had on Mike Hideous. Um, and I knew both of these guys. I knew both of them. I knew Michael Aquino from TOS, and I also knew Mike Hideous from when in the 90s I was in a goth band called Morphine Angel. I was in a touring band for a lot of the 90s, and I used to do shows with Mike Hideous. I knew him from like the old goth days, and it was so weird. I found your podcast, and you're doing this interview. You got both of these guys on, and I'm like, this is like so strange because I know all these people from different completely different corners of the universe, and they're all like coming together. And I just had a feeling from there that I'd probably be talking more with you someday. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, that really warms my heart hearing stuff like that. I always theorize that there are people out there listening, and that confirms that thought process. And yeah, absolutely, that Michael Aquino interview. Very very proud of that. Mainly because it's so hard to get those guys on any sort of podcast or anything. They get attacked a lot, and to get them to actually come on and answer questions, it was back then. It was like we were one of the first, sort of bigger paranormal slash things have evolved and things have gone a lot deeper down the rabbit hole. Excuse me, but back then, life was a lot simpler, and you could just ask people to come on. They weren't so bombarded by all these different shows and stuff like that, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
little bit easier to trick people on or get them on, I should say. And yeah, I've tried to get some the big people in more recent times, and it's a lot harder. But sadly, he's passed on,
Mm-hmm.
so whatever secrets he held, he's taken those with him. But some of my most memorable things about him, or probably the most memorable thing, would be when he was talking about the stargates. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he was bullshitting us. I think he was talking about something very real, something to do with the Earth and space and stars. And I'm not going to pretend to know how it works, but those things are definitely out there. That just raises the hairs on the back of your neck. Uh, Paul, when did you become aware of guys like Aquino?
Oh, geez. Well, Michael Aquino, I became aware of in the 80s. Um, I had gotten interested, as a teenager in the 80s, and I got interested in the occult and black magic and stuff like that. And I found through my, looking for more material on this, I found a book called the Satanic Bible. And when I read that book, it was a real game changer because I was interested in this occult stuff and this black magic stuff, but the thing is no one ever really could, none of the books that I could find at the time, nothing really explained why this kind of stuff worked, or addressed like kind of the greater question of like what kind of universe do we actually live in. And when I found that book, the Satanic Bible, it 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 added something new to the equation. It had an ethos to it. It had a why and a wherefore, and it talked about this thing called magic in a way that.
Was this sorry to cut you off, but was this a major were you raised in any way to be against this sort of thing? Was this a major breakthrough for you to even kind of like pick up the book and open up the pages?
Well, yes and no. So, I mean, I was born into a Judeo-Christian context, but through various circumstances, death in the family, remarriage, moving around, I was in a. By the time I was a teenager, I wasn't being regularly uh, pushed religion, in any serious way. So, nevertheless, I had just sort of a natural rebelliousness, anyhow. And the way this book came across, it was not just a rebelliousness against religion per se, against Christianity per se, but it really represented a rebelliousness against the whole entire sort of limited worldview that seemed to be being pushed at that time period. And it really represented a possibility for personal individual freedom. It really resonated with the concept of individualism, that each of us is unique, and these were ideas that were very, very dear to me at that time. So I'd read that book, I picked that up, I kind of practiced some of it, and reflected on the philosophy a bit. And then in I want to say this is 1988, there was a special on Geraldo Rivera, who was a very popular, talk show host at the time. Did a Halloween special where he had on Michael Aquino, Zena LeVay, and a couple of other people. And you may have heard of this. You can find this on YouTube now. It's kind of legendary now.
Yeah, yeah. I not only do I remember it from when I was a child, that's how impactful it was, but years later I watched it a couple times on YouTube. So yeah, very familiar. That fascinating interview, especially at the time, because back then that's pre-internet, pre most people knowing anything even close to this subject matter.
Right. And it was the time of the satanic panic too. So and I'd kind of just on my own just taken the kind of rational self-interest approach that you find just in the satanic bible and the satanic rituals and other scraps that I was able to find. And I lived in a secluded sort of I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska at the time. So there wasn't other people around that were into these kinds of things, but I would talk about it with people every once in a while. And this is also the era of the satanic panic. So there was all this stuff on TV saying, scaring parents into thinking that if your kids listen to metal music, then they're going to be crazy satanic cult members and all of this. And um, so when I saw Dr. Aquino on the Geraldo Rivera show, speaking very, very rationally, very eloquently, and very intelligently out, it just completely dispelled all of the mythology of this being like a heavy metal sort of thing, and really like took it to a new level. And that was the first time that I saw him. This man just showing this incredible courage to stand up there on the stage and have everyone in the audience like yelling at him, and it was just it was really powerful for me at the time to see this. And long story short, a few years later, I ended up joining the Church of Satan, and this was at a time um, when I understand now that the COS was going through different leadership things at the time. And basically my experience in the COS did not lead anywhere at all. Like I never talked to any of the
I'm
people.
sorry, is this
Huh?
you mentioned leadership changes? I'm guessing this is post Aquino, when the little, like, I don't know that much about it, but I know there was indeed a power struggle.
Oh, definitely. No, this is
Mhm.
way after that. Like,
Gotcha.
Dr. Aquino leaving the organization happened in 1975, like way before, before I was even thinking about things like this. In 1988, the leadership issues had to do with Xena moving into an authority position in the organization, and Anton kind of going through a malaise about things and just not really being very involved. So what this meant for me living in, being a kid living in, Lincoln, Nebraska at the time, is I never heard from anyone in the COS. So I just kind of concluded that, what people said is right. There's not really anything going on there. So it was a couple of years in after that where I reached out to the TOS, which was much more friendly at that time, easier to, more responsive at least. And so that's how I ended up getting involved with TOS, and eventually, meeting Dr. Aquino and stuff like that. And very much appreciated that experience. He came off as very different than he did on television, like you would imagine anyone does, but very friendly, very had a really great sense of humor, just really tried to put people at ease around him, and to keep things simple. So that's basically my story in a
So, do
nutshell.
you, when you enter into the Temple of Set, do you meet Michael Aquino right away, or do you go to a meeting and he's leading the meeting, or do they like put you in a room where you get to meet him for the first time? How does that interaction come to be?
Well, it's like it's much more informal than that. So there are gatherings that occur, annual gatherings, conferences that occur, and so I met him at one of these sorts of things, and got to just speak with him in a hotel lobby uh, kind of context.
And I take it he came off as like the nicest guy in the world, kind of like when I
Yeah.
interviewed him.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. I asked him some questions about a book he wrote called The Diabolicon, which you might have heard of, which I was very, very interested in. And I'll always remember that he said to me, he said, "I'm not a theologian. I'm a political scientist, and I'm just interested in getting at the truth about things." And I think that really summarized it for me. I mean, everything that I ever saw him do after that was always in the context of that he was just a person who was very interested in getting at the truth about things, which is a higher value that so many of us can relate to. And to take this thing called, the soul, and where the soul might have come from, and let's just like bring this in, and let's just kind of work with this. Let's feel free to explore it. We might not know the answer to everything, but just because we don't know the answers to things, we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions and to make efforts to try and move in a direction.
Got it. So, altogether, how long did you spend in the Satanic Church versus the Temple of Set? Were you officially a member of the Satanic Church?
Yeah, and only for a couple of years in the COS, and then I was in TOS for a couple of decades.
Okay, so I take it you like TOS much, much more.
Oh yeah, I stayed there for a while.
Would you say the things that Michael Aquino has said about Anton LaVey, or did you get any indication that they're true? Was he a very ego-based man?
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't want to comment on verifying, any of that. I know that there was a lot that went on between these guys, and they had different perspectives ultimately on what occurred and what happened. But one thing that I will always recall, and going back to that Geraldo Rivera special, is during that time period, during the 80s, Dr. Aquino, he stuck up for everyone who was on the left-hand path, and you might have seen his Oprah Winfrey. He also went on Oprah Winfrey and did a much longer interview with her around the same time period. And he could have easily gone on those shows and turned it all into Anton LaVey is wrong about this, and he could have easily done that. He did not. He went on those shows and he defended like this whole thing as, I mean, he really believed that this represented like a new movement for humanity, and he didn't go on and he didn't throw Anton under the bus on those shows. He defended like this whole movement at that time period. And I just thought it was so sad then that after that, later on in the 90s, the new generation of COS people came on and the internet and social media, internet appeared and everything, and they just really went hard on him. And that always just kind of broke my heart, because I'm thinking, he really, like, he defended all of you during this horrible time when Anton was not around. Anton was not around during any of the satanic panic stuff. He hid out through that, and then he came back in the 90s. Anton came back into visibility in the 90s when, like Marilyn Manson, all these bands were coming out, and it was like a safer kind of time to do that. So I'll always have a lot of respect for the way Dr. A stood up for that stuff and really stood up for the idea of the human soul. Now, one thing I'll say that I think might be relevant to some of the other things that we're going to talk about is that Dr. Aquino was very bold in stating that he was not an atheist, and this system that they were following at the time is not atheism. And Anton, like, if you go back and you look at the Satanic Bible, it does not say in there that this is atheism. Okay. Now, new editions of the Satanic Bible, if you read the foreword of it, whatever new person has written the new foreword of it, they always say, "Oh yeah, it's just atheism," right? That's like become the new thing for it. And then, of course, this is, then you have the TST is very open about this. Yeah, it's atheism with psychodrama. And it just kind of like, it just kind of carved out this whole like spiritual aspect of it. And there is this idea of, if you just go back to the essence of the Satanic Bible as it came out, no, there is this essence of, what is the essence of humanity, and it's talking about, magic and all of these things, which, certainly a hardcore atheist would not admit to that. And this might have as much to do with how the popular understanding of the term atheism has changed and kind of shifted in the last few decades. But that's a significant difference, I think, is that then eventually, Anton and I did start saying more and more in interviews that that this is basically just atheism with psychodrama. Became the catchphrase for it. And Dr. A never went that route. Like, this is always something to do with the soul. The soul is possibly free of the material universe, and all these other things that you would talk about in any philosophy of metaphysics class about, the nature of reality.
Yes, certainly. Kind of getting back to what you were saying about Aquino defending the left-hand path. This is a topic that I've struggled with myself, and still have many friends of mine. I've gotten a little bit into exploring the left-handed path myself. Did some research, tried some ritual type of stuff, and I had some amazing results, both spectacular and I guess slightly terrifying at times. But I'm of the belief that this is about growth. It's not about selling your soul or embracing evil. What do you think of that? Is the left-handed path evil? Is it wrong? Can you give us a solid answer on that question?
Well, yes. So the way it was intended by what I like to call the founding fathers of the left-hand path, which is loosely, Anton LaVey, Michael Aquino, And Stephen Flowers, who wrote a really good book called Lords of the Left Hand Path, which I think defines it all very well in the way these people were thinking about it, is that um, it represents, individuality. It represents the idea that the 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 soul or the psyche can go through a process of evolution into a divine state, and that individuation becomes more solid as this process of transformation continues. You become more of an individual. You don't lose your individuality as a result of the spiritual pursuit. And this was contrasted from right hand path, which they defined as a form of self obliteration, that you're subservience to the idea of God, or in Buddhism, especially how Westerners have interpreted Buddhism. You find this idea of well, all of the self is an illusion, and we overcome that, and just sort of return to the universal oneness with everything, becoming one with everything, basically. And so that's kind of how the founding fathers of the LHP defined it, as far as I understand it. Now, before they did that, the term left hand path was I think it comes out of, maybe I've heard it comes out of Hinduism, but then I've heard Hindu people say that's not really true. So I don't really know, but I do know that Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, the occultist, um, used the term left-hand path in her writings to refer to evil people who follow the way. Aleister Crowley kind of ran with that and talked about the Black Brothers, or people who follow, the Golden Dawn system of initiation and end up going some other path of it. Um, but what I found then, even more recently, we find left hand path sort of being conflated with left wing politics, and so it's almost becoming like a politicized sort of thing. But where I sort of got off the elevator on this was when I started to realize that this definition of left hand path was based upon a a illusory image of what was conceived as right hand path religions. So let me just unpack, just to unpack that a little bit. Um, there's a term I use called church Christianity, or churchification, because people have always noticed, and I'm sure you've seen this, that as much as, like, we might say, oh well, the church is, like, created all these problems and difficulties for humanity, what you realize is that even though that this has happened, you'll go back and you'll find certain things that appear, like in the gospel, certain statements that appear in the gospels that still seem to contain some kind of wisdom within them. And why is that? Well, what's happened is, and this actually happens with, this is the same case with Buddhism and Hinduism, all these other religions have the same thing happening, is that when it gets, like, so far away from the founder, so many generations away from the founder, what happens is there's no one who really understands what was meant by these original ideas anymore. So they just turn it into rules for behavior. They just turn it into a bunch of rules for behavior and a bunch of ceremonies which no one really understands the meaning of anymore. And so people go and they perform the ceremonies and they go to church, so they're good with their community. And so it becomes more of a cultural phenomenon than it does a system of self-development. But you go back and if you go back and look in the Gospels yourself and find Christ's words, he clearly intended this as a system of self-development. And he clearly, rejects, the scribes and Pharisees and all the people who like love their rules more than they love the idea of divinity. And he says, the kingdom of heaven is within, and all of these like sorts of
Yeah,
things.
that's what I kind of have always actually liked about Christ is he has shown that sort of rebel spirit.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you turn off all the noise of what all the mainstream is trying to tell you about all the churches that want your money, and want to dragoon you into their system. If you could get past all of that noise and just kind of study some of that and absorb some of that for yourself, you find there's a very different picture in there. So I mean, this kind of got me to the point of saying, well, I don't even know. This brought me to a point where that idea of there being a left-hand path and a right-hand path um, kind of started to lose its value and lose its significance, because once you realize, well, what he was rebelling against, what Anton LaVey was like rebelling against. He was rebelling against the churchified version of Christianity. He wasn't really rebelling against these specific ideas in here, kingdom of heaven is within, and all of that kind of stuff. Um, and another problem that you have is that so many people within the churchification movement, there's this tendency to go towards the literal meaning of everything, like and again, this is I'm using Christianity as an example because it's convenient here, but you can say the same things about Taoism, Buddhism, like Taoism, which I get into in the book here, that um, once you realize that facade of it has all been invented, then you realize he was rebelling against this illusion of it, rebelling against the social illusion of it. And once you're not worried about that illusory churchified version of it anymore, then it's like suddenly the LHP moniker it just kind of dropped away from me and was no longer something that was really doing it for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I find that there's also some key places where like the right hand and left hand might come together, like anything to do with drinking Christ's blood or eating his flesh. There's left-handed rituals that are. What I mean to say is, it sounds like it's right out of a book for left-handed rituals. A lot of these require, sacrificing living beings or offering up your own blood and stuff like that. Of course, I would never sacrifice anything, but
Well,
um,
absolutely. And I'll just clarify. I'll clarify here that none of the I've talked about some of the orgs I've been in the past. None of them do any of that kind of stuff or condone any of that kind of stuff whatsoever. And I've never even been in the same room with anyone doing anything with any kind of blood sacrifice or anything like that. In fact, I'll say that most of the people that I met through it, many of them are total like animal lovers, animal rights people, would never like harm anything. Very, very, very peaceful, a very peaceful group of people that you don't have to worry about. And as far as I can tell, a lot of that blood sacrifice stuff. I don't know. I don't even know how much of that is like for real, or how much of that is just hoax like mythology that like got really perpetuated and stirred up by, you know, Slayer songs and things like that in the 80s. Of course, if you go back to primitive culture and stuff, that was probably certainly a thing at some point. And then you go back to like if you go back to like the Old Testament, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that uh, going on back in the day. But yeah, just to clarify, I never saw anything like that going on in my experience.
yeah, that's another thing that's puzzled me is the going back into the Old Testament and they're sacrificing goats and things like that. Um, Any thoughts on that sort of thing, like the similarity between the sacrifice and the the old Hebrew ways, and things like um, boy, I'm having a little brain fart here. What's it called? They cut the circumcision.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
circumcision.
circumcision. I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed. Um, any thoughts on that? Like, why would these things be so similar? Like, maybe it was all just one big religion back then, or extremes of one religion.
Well, this is something that I touch on in my book. So I'll just like segue into this. Um, that when you go back, when you go back and you start looking at the texts themselves, you start to see all these similarities. So my book, I was starting with um, Secret of the Golden Flower, which is an ancient Taoist manual. And as I was writing the book, I started to realize, and the reason I was writing this book is because of these experiences that I had. And those experiences led me back to reconsider this Secret of the Golden Flower book, which I had read many years earlier. But as I was writing the book and writing my experiences, I started to find other sources like the Gospels, like the Bhagavad Gita, like the Zoroastrian Gathas, which would have the same ideas, have similar ideas in them. And I kept putting citations in them, and so I have all these like footnotes in the book, like citing all these other systems that correspond with what I was talking about. And I realized at a certain point, I just have to cut this off, or it's going to turn into another. It's going to turn into a different book. I'm getting too stretched out on this. But I think what I've come to see is that um, when you go back far enough and these differences start to go away, it starts to look like everything might have come from one source. And I'm not the first person to say this. Sometimes they use the term universalism, is one term that's used to describe this, and that's been around for a while. So I'm not creating anything new by coming up with this. But I found a word in studying the Bhagavad Gita. There's a word in Sanskrit that's Sanatan Dharma, which can be translated as eternal order. And Sanatan Dharma, generally speaking, this is basically what Hinduism, what people who live in India will call the religion versus Hinduism, which is kind of a Western created term to just describe all that stuff that they didn't really understand that was going on over there at the time. And this idea of eternal order or Sanatan Dharma, you trace it back and it goes back to, the Rig Veda, and it goes back to, the Zoroastrianism comes out of there somewhere, and it keeps going back, and it's just so ancient that it just vanishes. It just vanishes into the mists of ancient history. And you find there's just these common ideas about it. And one of the most common ideas is that, again, that there's this eternal order, that there's an order that descends, that comes down to us. Sometimes it's represented as the sun, that unfolds with time, and that somewhere way back there is the pure principles, right? The pure forms of 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 life and the world, of the good, the true, and the beautiful. That's what Aristotle liked to call it: the good, the true, and the beautiful. And as this order descends, there's a degradation that occurs, a gradual degradation of the order until we find ourselves in the world, and it's very hard to see the truth. We just have this idea of truth. And so we have to kind of, if we want to find out what's going on, we have to kind of like dig through it. And here in this world, everything is all divided and degraded and corrupted and messed up. So it looks like there's like all these different systems and stuff going on. Um, but underneath it all, there is this sense of unity in it. And to me, that's a lot of what the call is about. That you have a call to try and find out what the truth is. Which that takes me back to like those words that Dr. Aquino told me way back then. I'm interested in getting at the truth about things, because the truth is it's a principle. When we try and discover the truth here in the world, it's always problematic. There's always a problem. It's never easy finding out the truth about anything, but we all have within us this idea of the truth. We have a concept of the truth, and all humans, no matter where they live, in the world, or what time they live in, they have a sense of, you know, the imperfection of the world, but also that things should be a different way. We have the experience of how things are and how things ought to be, and there ought to be truth. So that's like kind of the little piece of the form that still resonates within us, that still echoes within us. So to me, this is why Christ says the kingdom of heaven is within, that you have to look inside for it. You look outside for truth. Well, we're in the world around us, or what in Buddhism and San Antonio they call Maya, like a world of delusion, that we all live in an illusion, or we live in a simulation, simulacra. That's a very popular term for this nowadays. That we're all living in a simulation. Um, and once you realize that you are living in a simulation, if you're a rational person, what can you possibly hope for but to escape it? And so you look outside of yourself, you just see the simulation. So you have to learn how to look inside in order to see something beyond that, to see some image of truth.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense to me. One thing that changed for me when I started to get into the left-handed path a little bit was the idea of the gods. And when I did go back to the Bible and the Old Testament, I'd come to find that these gods were actually mentioned in the Bible. And it's so weird how society and the church seems to kind of just gloss over the whole thing. I mean, you hear the Queen of Heaven, Bel, I believe Marduk, Beelzebub. These are all names that you hear in the actual Bible. Yet we've kind of been led to believe that things are a little bit different from a Christian perspective. But when you actually look at what the Bible says, it seems to fall in line with all these other old mythologies, if you want to call them that. The Greeks, or even earlier the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, stuff like that. It all seems to be part of the same puzzle. And I suppose that's the fun of doing a program like this, is the constant and never ending learning. But Paul, I understand that you yourself have a very successful podcast.
I do. I totally do. It's called Daemonosophy, is the name of the podcast, and I've been doing it since 2016, I think. And it kind of started out. Um, I'd put on some talks that I'd given, recordings of some lectures that I'd given, and those were going on, and then I ended up doing an interview with Michael Aquino, and that kind of like exploded it into an actual podcast of doing interviews and stuff like that. Before that, I was just kind of putting my stuff out there, and I figured out how to do the stream thing. So my SoundCloud, recordings would go out on the podcast stream onto Apple Podcasts. But that was around the time that I started just doing interviews with it. And I mean, it's a great modern way to continue that search for truth.
Absolutely. What have been some of your favorite guests?
Oh, geez. Well,
That's like when somebody asks you to pick your favorite kid.
right, exactly. No, it's hard to say. So, let's see. Okay, so Brian Warner, who was one of the founding members of the TST, and then he's in a death metal band, and he's gonna be so mad I can't remember the name of the band right now. I'm so like
You
out of
forgot to
touch.
plug my band.
Right, he's gonna be mad at me, but we had a great conversation. And then Shane Bugby is another guy I've had on recently who was also a founding member of the TST. Both of these guys also they tell me, look, the TST was originally not supposed to be a political organization at all. They took a left turn at Albuquerque. Um, but that was really good. Boyd Rice, I had Boyd Rice on. And he's a very interesting character. Has a lot of great stories. A lot of great stories to tell. Um, oh, Stanton. I had Stanton LaVey on the show, and he was like really great. He's also deceased now as well, but really a great guy to talk to. So it's like doing a podcast is great because you get to talk to like really interesting people, and that you might not otherwise. So I really love it. What do you
Yeah,
think? What do
absolutely.
you think?
I have to agree. Podcasting for me has changed my life. Um, I've always kind of had these weird experiences. Grew up in a very um, Christian sort of household, and I was taught about things like revelations and things like that, and I was taught about supernatural spirits, entities, and things like that. But I kind of rejected it all because I was growing up in today's society, and today's society tells you that's all fake. The only thing that's real is what you see on Bill Nye the Science Guy. And I wanted to believe that because it made me feel safer. I didn't want to believe in scary things, and if I'm not a good guy I might go to hell and burn forever. So I rejected it a lot, and I had some experiences in my early adulthood that had me asking a lot of questions. And then starting this podcast was an extension of that interest. Specifically I had a UFO experience that was very puzzling,
Hmm.
and I went on to start the show with Michael and met some amazing people. And in my opinion, the greatest minds in this world are the people that go on shows like Coast to Coast AM, and I guess maybe they go on Joe Rogan and stuff like that now. But it definitely brought me to a whole different level. I could remember it clearly when I was having those days when I was waking up in the morning and thinking to myself, "Oh my God, everything about this world I've been taught is false." Things like magic, it's real, and many other things. Supernatural creatures, um, past societies that existed, alternate history, powers of the mind. I mean, I could go on and on with this stuff, but Paul, you had started to talk about something, and I possibly interrupted you, and I'm sure people out there think that when I do that, I'm not going to go back. But you were starting to talk a little bit about magic, and I
Mm-hmm.
kind of wanted to, get your story on magic. Did you become aware of it with the Satanic Bible, or well, why don't you just let us know yourself? What was it that what were your magical experiences or your magical experience in general, if there was one? Maybe you came to find that it's all a bunch of crap. Let us know, please.
Well, I started getting interested in this idea when I was, I don't know, maybe 13 years old, 12, 13 years old, something like that. Um, and it might have had to do, it might have had to do as much with playing Dungeons and Dragons as anything else. Um, but I was at a point in my life where, like many people at that age, felt that I lacked agency, lacked some autonomy over my existence. You know, parents and teachers telling you what to do all the time, and in the idea of magic, I found the possibility of being able to take back some of that, or gain some of that autonomy. Now, of course, the reality of the situation now is that I can look back and say, well, I was just a kid. I didn't know what the fuck was going on anyhow, you know? In a few years, it's over and you're an adult, and then you've got real problems um, to deal with. But at the time, I ended up on a on a big search for this. I was looking for any kind of occult books that I could find. I found uh, Sarah Liddon Morris's Modern Witches Spell Book, and I thought that that was like really cool. And and then I found was it Arthur A. E. Waite's Book of Ceremonial Magic and Complete Grimoire, which gets into goetic magic, which is all about summoning demons and stuff and sending demons out to do things for you. And and again, when I found you know, Anton LaVey's ideas and stuff, it sort of represented a more mature way of like approaching some of these ideas. Uh, but what I realized after, you know, many years later, um, what I realized is so much of this magic and 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 there's almost always like two most schools like will say that there's like two kinds of magic. There's like the kind of magic where you're just trying to get stuff for yourself, and then there's a kind of magic where you're trying to invite some kind of wisdom within you, and that starts to look a little bit more like ceremony and ceremonies that you see in conventional religious institutions. But what I realized, and Anton LaVey like really marks this down, it's like whenever people are trying to do magic to get something for themselves, it's always for the same stuff. You know, it's because they want to fuck someone, or it's because they need money or need a job, or it's because they want revenge on someone.
Mm.
It's always for these same things. I mean, if you notice
That's
that,
so true.
it's always for the same shit, right? And all of them, they're all for to gain things that are themselves just temporary. Um, so another figure that I've gotten very interested in is one of the Tibetan saints named Milarepa, and there's a book called The Life of Milarepa, which is kind of his autobiography from like the 11th century. But one of the things that Milarepa does is when he's like very young, like his father died early, and then his uncle like screwed over his family and basically took all of their land. So his mother told him, I want you to go learn black magic and take revenge on him. And you must do it. If you don't do it, I'll kill myself right in front of you. So Milarepa, a young kid, he goes out and, you know, wandering in the Tibetan mountains, and he finds like a teacher of black magic, and he learns black magic, goes through this whole process. all these different adventures and stuff. And then he ends up using his black magic to get his revenge on his aunt and uncle. And he like has a house fall down on him, and he like leaves the uncle alive, but kills like basically all of his like family and offspring. And so eventually what Milarepa realizes is part in the story, his reflecting on what happened, he realizes that he didn't actually gain anything from it. They didn't get the land back from it. And he also realizes that all the people that died, well, they were going to die eventually anyhow. And it starts to like stir his, he starts to realize the transience of these things, the temporalness, the temporary nature of these things that we want, that are fueled by appetite. They're fueled by appetite. They're not fueled by some wish for some higher state of being or more, to know the truth about existence. They're fueled by your appetites, your hunger, your appetite for sex, your appetite for revenge. And that those things are all just temporary things, anyhow. And so that's where the point in the story where Milarepa, he starts to experience conscience, and then he starts to, from there the story goes on, and he goes and he starts to meditate, he finds a guru, and he goes through this different path. So I kind of went through a similar thing myself, with all of magic and stuff, is that I just realized that you fulfill one want or one need, and you always have this thing like doing, casting spells or whatever. There's always this, if it happens, if something happens and you're like, yeah, the magic works. If something similar happens, it's like, oh, well, the magic worked a little bit, but it's trying to teach me a lesson. If it doesn't work at all, then, oh, well, they're trying to teach me a lesson about how I didn't need this, I needed something else. I mean, you come up with you can explain anything away about whether or not it works or not. But what is real is that there is emotional energy that is like very powerful. What is true is that negative energy does pass from one person to another. We do pass it on to each other. That is true. And what also is true is like whatever I gain for my because of my appetite, whether it was money or sex or revenge or whatever, it passes. The appetite for it passes, or the thing that I got passes, and my appetite is still like hungry for this or that. So you start to say, well, maybe it's not really about just getting everything that my appetite tells me I should get. Because why do I want these certain things? Why do I have like a appetite for this or that? Where does that come from? People have different appetites, so that kind of like led me to this, to a different sort of question about things. And somewhere along the way, I picked up the practice of meditation. Like I've tried meditation a couple of times in the past, and I would do it, every once in a while out of response to things. If I'm stressed out, I'm gonna like meditate, to calm myself down and such what. But I reached a point where, and I'll say this was a response initially. It had to do with COVID, I think, the COVID lockdowns and stuff. At some point in there, I just became real hardcore about meditation. I just started doing it. I started doing it daily. I found that the longer I waited to do it in the day, the more likely something would happen and get away, and steal the time away from me. So I started doing it earlier and earlier until I'm like, okay, I'm just doing it first thing in the morning. And then I found that I was still drinking a lot. I was a heavy drinker, all through the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and I realized that that drinking on the weekends was interfering with my ability to get up and meditate in the morning. So I started to phase drinking out. And then eventually I got to a point where I was doing it regularly every day, and I had kind of like forgotten how long I've been doing it. It'd been like a couple of years. And then I had an experience during one of my meditation sessions, and this is ultimately what I started calling a second awakening. Um, I write about in the book. I started to
Can we
realize,
see that one more time?
yeah,
Like real close to the camera. Just want to, yeah, okay. And we can get your book Second Awakening on Amazon on your website.
yes,
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. So, so I had this experience during my meditation session one morning, where there was just a new kind of experience, a sort of welling up of energy uh, within me, of pure sensation. And it didn't fully like go away. Like then I'm like, okay, I'm done meditating, and I'm drinking my coffee, but I'm like, wow, I still like had the taste of it. It's very difficult to describe this, but um, to find the words, but it stayed with me that day. The taste was still there the next day. It was there the next day. It just went on for weeks, and um, I started to wonder. I wondered, what is this? Is there something? Can I find? There must be some books about this. I'm a bookworm. I want to find a book about everything that I experience, but I didn't know how to articulate my experience. And then I remembered a book that I had read when I was much younger, called "Secret of the Golden Flower." And just something about it made me think maybe I should look at that book again. So I went and I started checking that book out again, and I realized that this was really, it was describing what I was experiencing. And the thing that I didn't catch, I'd read this book when I was in my 20s, and I really didn't get then that Secret of the Golden Flower is a manual. There's one copy of it that I have, Secret of the Golden Flower. That it's a manual for meditation. That's what it's for. I'd read it before, and I just sort of intellectually took some of the ideas out of it. Said, "Yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great idea." But when you're not practicing something like this, it's really easy to think to feel like if you're thinking about certain things that you're actually doing them. But the reality is that you're not. Like, say I read, you know, I read the Gospels about the kingdom of heaven is within, that we were talking about earlier. Well, it's easier to trick myself into thinking that I've looked inside myself because I read that. But the reality is, I don't even know what it means to look inside myself. What does that mean, look inside yourself? Does it mean just imagining things? Because there's nothing special about that. We sit around and imagine things and daydream all the time. So maybe it means something more than that. So, um, when I went and looked at Secret of the Golden Flower, like one of the things it talks about is that you carry out meditation, a stillness, silence practice for what they call the 100 days. And after the end of the 100 days, there's this change, and the primordial spirit comes to dwell within you, which means there's this awakening of sort of another perspective, which is talked about in all these other systems. Now, some people will say Kundalini is one word they use to talk about this. But then there's this whole other Kundalini crowd that kind of goes off onto some other things. So I kind of shy away from saying that, that this isn't really a Kundalini book, per se, but you find this idea in other systems, like it's in the Gospels also. Sometimes the term Holy Spirit sounds like there's this life force energy that awakens within. Sometimes Christ calls it with this term, Greek word, the paraclete, which no one in church Christianity ever talks about the paraclete, but it's in there. It's in the Gospels. He refers to it as this other consciousness, this life force energy that can be awakened within. And so that's how I got into this idea for this book. And so then as I went through the Secret of the Golden Flowers, reading it again, all these ideas came up to me and whatnot. And so the whole book is just ends up being sort of an analysis of that based on my experience. I talk a little bit more in depth about the experience that I just referred to in the book, to kind of give like some background on why I'm writing this exegesis on the Secret of the Golden Flower. It connects with the scarab. Like the ancient Taoists, there's a one passage in here where they talk about the scarab being a symbol for the creation of a new body. And this is another thing that comes up in all these different systems. Like, in Corinthians, St. Paul refers to it as the spiritual body, is like different from like the carnal body that arises within one. In some systems, like astral body, Blavatsky talks about astral body. Hinduism, they call it astral body, or they'll call it subtle body. It's in all these systems. The idea that through this practice, a new life force, a primal life force energy is awakened within us. And we're supposed to have that life force energy anyhow. We just stopped experiencing it at some point in history, which is generally connected with the idea of a fallen state, that humanity, that we're in a fallen state, that we live life in a hypnotic sort of like sleep kind of state. But when we can awaken from that, we can, it's like you're connecting a couple of circuits, and this it completes the circuit. You're connecting a couple of wires. I guess that's what I should have said. That like completes the circuit, and this life force energy starts to move again within you.
Yeah, that's great, and probably something that everybody needs to take a look at. Um, yeah, when I was kind of getting into occult stuff, I talk about it on social media, and I through doing this show and throwing little tidbits out there, I gained quite a following, and kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, I had a lot of younger people messaging me, and it was all that same stuff, like, oh, what can I do? Give me a spell so I can get this one girl that I've had a crush on since eighth grade or something like that. And in my mind, I'm like, oh man, I'm creeped out. Like, I don't even really want this person reaching out or talking to me. And I'm thinking, like, this person's a stalker, and this person needs to do something about the desire rather than keep trying to fulfill that desire. And boy, what a lesson is that. Why are we taking these like momentary, impulsive, um, emotional sort of desires, and trying to turn them into like an eternal thing? Like, I'm sure there's some higher part of us that would look down and say, "Wow, you're out of your mind."
Oh yeah. I mean, you look at all of the Aleister Crowley chaos magic, sex magic stuff. I mean, people so desperately want to believe that you can accomplish things in life just by masturbating a lot. You know, I mean, that's what it comes down to. And not realizing that no, no, no. I mean, as long as you're out here, spilling out your energy everywhere, like physically and metaphorically, right? There's also a metaphor with this, that we spill out all of our energy into the world through expressing negativity and pointless talking and things like this, and that really what we want to do, what a silence practice, a silence and a stillness practice does, is it it keeps all of this energy within you, and once you have this energy within you, it starts to it starts to complete the work that you started out with when you came into the world, what your essence was, right? Like we come into the world with the essence of a blueprint DNA, and everything that we could possibly be is all, it's like how the acorn eventually is going to turn into an oak tree. And so we grow like a little bit, but somewhere in our childhood, through a combination of social indoctrination and the fallen state, and I'm sure bad diet and stuff like that, we get stalled out, and our what we acquire in life, which is our personality, right? Essence is what we come into the world with. Personality is what we acquire in life, or sometimes they call this the ego, right? It's what we acquire. That ends up taking over. That ends up taking over and creating what Wilhelm Reich called character armor. It creates an armor over our character, so we become cut off from reality to some extent. We become we're unable to receive emotions, or express genuine emotions. We get all this dysfunction associated with it, and people will try and fix this situation. So I see, like, say something like magic offers this possibility for fixing all these problems that we come into the world with. But the problem is, you fix one problem, there's another problem, and ultimately the problem is much deeper. It's within you somewhere. You don't know how to manage all that stuff in there. So the idea is that through a through a stillness and a silence practice, and trying to reactivate this circuit of life force energy, we can start to grow that essence again. That blueprint of the DNA can start to move within us again. There can start to be healing within the body. The other thing that happened to me when I had this experience is just almost immediately my appetites changed. My desires changed. I mean, how do you do that? You can't just consciously, oh, I'm going to change my desire for this or that. People do that all the time, right? I'm going to change my desire for cigarettes, and then you're smoking again, right? It's like not easy to do that. But suddenly my appetite for food completely changed. I immediately went on what I found out was basically a ketogenic diet, which I needed to do. The other thing I didn't mention is I'd been suffering from ulcerative colitis for about a decade prior to this, and I was on all these drugs for it, and it was fucking me up pretty bad. But I changed my diet. I immediately just completely cut out alcohol out of my diet, and I just immediately I completely lost the desire to stay up late. And the only thing that I really was desirous was to have more of this silence and stillness kind of kind of experience. But what I found within a couple of years of this, then my ulcerative colitis went away. I stopped taking the drugs. I don't know if you about colitis is it's a autoimmune condition. When you get it, they tell you, oh, it's genetic and you're going to have it the rest of your life. Here's the drugs you'll have to be on for the rest of your life, and that's all the medical establishment has to tell you. And because of the experience I had, I can come back and I can say they're fucking wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. It's the food that's killing us. It was the food that was like killing me. And so now I'm just a straight carnivore diet now, for about three plus years now.
Yeah, that's making a whole lot of sense to me. In my personal experience, like I could say that pot, like when I was younger, I was addicted to it. And if I didn't have it, I'd get really grumpy. I'd have to, find some way to get it, even if it meant taking one like your glass bong and scraping all the resin out of it and smoking the resin. I'm sure a lot of people out there can relate. But now I still use pot, but I'm not addicted to it. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that sounds very strange to a lot of people, but basically now I could just stop doing it and I wouldn't even really care. Whereas before, I felt like this is something that I needed. And while you were talking, one particular phrase kind of came to me, and I think it's very relevant. It says that you have to let go to grow, and I find that to be very true. And going back to the thing about relationships, like really wanting somebody and not being able to have that person, there's a tremendous amount of growth when you kind of let that childish desire grow, and you might start looking at uh, people that are very different as a potential mate that don't have those qualities, but you may have learned that they're not as important as you've previously thought. And that's another reason why it's important not to get caught up in desires. I know that's a part of Buddhism as well, is to relieve the desire, and that's something that I think can strengthen a person quite a bit. So I definitely appreciate your perspective, Paul. But I also want to ask you about um, I know you've been a part of certain organizations and groups, and there's many people out there, and me included, unfortunately, that believe that there is a conspiracy out there, that there's a network of secret societies that are kind of supported by the billionaires and the families that go back to ancient times, most likely bloodlines and things of that nature. Do you have any thoughts on a supposed Illuminati?
Um, I'm a big fan of Robert Anton Wilson. I read his Illuminatus trilogy in the early 90s when I was really getting into a lot of these things. And I, I really love his perspective on it. Are there conspiracies? Certainly, right? Do groups of people with power get together and say, "Well, this is what we should do for mankind"? Um, Absolutely, such things exist. For sure, they exist. Um, do organizations, do families try and preserve their bloodlines? Most definitely, they do. Certainly. Um, Now it's hard to say what the central conspiracy is. So I just watched. I'll share with you since this has come up. I just watched David Icke's series on Gaia that's on Prime right now. Have you seen that?
No, but I have seen and read a lot of his stuff. I definitely respect his perspective and research.
It's interesting. I mean, he touches on a lot of things. He touches on so many different things, and it's like very, very interesting. And he doesn't commit too much to any one particular thing, but it's definitely worth the watch if you have a tolerance tolerance for that sort of thing. But um, one of the things I think that we can relate to here that we've talked about is the idea of a simulacrum, or the idea that we live within a simulation. This is one of the things that he talks about in that. And his conspiracy model is that the uh, simulation is basically being created by the the power brokers who are a bloodline, and all of this, and what are they moving humankind towards. And this idea of a simulation it's another one of these ancient ideas. So the in Sanskrit and Buddhism, it's Maya, the world of illusion. The Zoroastrians call it the Druge. The ancient Egyptians called it the serpent's Apep. Um, it's a theme that just appears over and over again. It's in the Gospels too. Christ calls it the world, right? The simulation is the world that we exist in right now, which is pretty insight when you realize that that's what he means by the world. And so it's been known. All of the prophets have known about this. All the prophets, all the magi, it's it's part of their teaching. So there's something to it, and we can verify it through our experience in life. Just how we, I mean, how many times do you go through a process in life where you realize things are not reality is not what you thought it was, and oh wow, there was like something else going on. It happens all the time. So the question I think is this happening right now towards an end that is gonna ruin everything? Are we all gonna be destroyed by this soon? Right? There's always that sense with it, with modern conspiracy theories, right? That oh, there's going to be some takeover, and we're going to have a digital ID track and trace society, which I am very concerned about that happening. I do not want that to happen where I live. But the question that you come up with is when you realize, well, all these ancient prophets and people were talking about the same, they had the same sort of concern. Is it that brings up the question, is this just something that this is just part of the world that we exist in, where it always appears that way, and every time we try and change it directly, right, you end up getting pulled into the illusion. That's the problem when you try and change it directly. And this is one of the problems with magic, like we were talking about with operative magic. When you're trying to change the world directly, you somehow get pulled into the game. And then the result is always lower than where you started out. So, what Second Awakening represents for me is, rather than trying to change the game or alter the game or manipulate the game by touching it and getting pulled into it, you turn your attention inwardly. You turn your attention inwardly through stillness and silence practice, through regular meditation, and it starts to change the rhythm of your existence within this world. So you have to think about all the things that you do on a daily basis, whatever it is. You brush your teeth every day, there's a rhythm of that every day. You get drunk on Fridays, there's a rhythm in that. Every weekend we do this. Your body gets used to that, your whole system gets used to that. When you establish a daily meditation practice, you're establishing a whole new rhythm in the cycle of your life that brings you back to this center. It brings you back to a center. As long as you're in the world and you're trying to interact with the world and change the world, you're getting pulled by the world. You can't maintain your center. You're getting pulled off your center all the time. Every time no matter what you try and do, you're getting pulled away from your center. The only way to recenter yourself is to stop and to be still and to do what sounds like the easiest thing in the world to do. What? Stop and be still? Well, that's too easy, But when you try it, anyways, tried meditation even a little bit, you realize that's really hard. It's really hard to be still.
It is.
For 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a half hour. Half hour is impossible for most people, but it's possible if you keep at it. But and all of that changes the more you start trying to work with it. I talk about this in the book. You start meditating. Oh God, I got an itch. I gotta adjust myself and everything. And it's like there's a certain phase that you just kind of power through it, and all that stuff eventually goes away.
Well,
And
let me ask you this,
yeah,
because I got into meditation a little bit years and years ago, and I encountered something that still puzzles me to this day. I almost feel like something was trying to block me from achieving a certain level of stillness because I would reach like a plateau and I would start to clear my mind, and then it's like I would reach another plateau, which is really hard to explain on a program like this, but it was a different feeling of consciousness. And then as I was, rising up, if you want to call it that, all of a sudden something weird happened where I saw this big flash across the horizon. I don't know what it was. I'm not going to say it's demons or anything like that because I don't know. It could have been a transformer exploding at the right moment. I have no idea. But it was a big bright orange flash, and then a spider the size of my hand crawls out from under my coffee table, and I'm visibly jolted because I don't know what's going on. But mostly, I'm thinking to myself, "What happened there?" I finally feel like I was getting somewhere doing this meditation, like more progress than I had ever made in my entire life. I feel like I was doing something that I'd never done before. There was something special going on, and all of a sudden it gets interrupted by this unexplainable flash and this giant house spider. That's just I have a fear of spiders. Any thoughts on what I'm completely puzzled by this, but Paul, do you have any thoughts on what might have been happening to me right there?
It's demons.
It is demons.
So look, all of the ancient texts, especially like Tibetan stuff, and I'm thinking also the Philokalia, written by the desert fathers, who the early monks who retired to the deserts to for silence in God and divinity. That what they're referring, whenever they talk about demons and devils, it's clear what they're talking about are the things that are trying to distract you and steal your attention, right? Because it's all about attention. It's all about trying to develop a new quality of attention. Like we live in a world right now where our attention is lost. It is stolen by everything. You wake up, you get up in the morning, and immediately your phone is trying to steal your attention. Social media is trying to steal your attention. People you know are trying to steal your attention. And when you try to meditate, it just rises up even more. There's different things, it's like distractions are trying to steal your attention. And it's all about trying to learn how to maintain your attention. So one of the techniques that I talk about in the book is is focusing your attention on sensation within the body and on breath within the body, on the movement of breath. If you focus on your breath within, not coming out here out of my mouth, but as it moves within, and you can like hear it going on inside of you, that brings your attention inside. And then you start to try and find sensation. In other words, my my left hand is sitting here completely still, but if I focus on it, I'm really still. I can sense it. There's feeling in there, and I just try and stay with that. Just try and stay with that feeling, and try and stay with my breath. And we come back to these things as anchors for attention, so that it doesn't get distracted, and so that it doesn't get stolen. One of the great stories out of the, since we are talking about demons and devils, one of the great stories that I like out of the Gospels is uh, where Christ meets a man who's possessed by demons, and and Christ asks him, "What is your name?" And he says, "My name is Legion, for we're many." And then Christ like lays his hand on him, and so now and says, "Now you're one," or something like that. But what that means is that we have this multiplicity of personalities. I want this, I want that. I have one personality for my friends. Well, I have a different personality for my wife. I have a different personality when I go to work. There's just all these different selves or that I have going on in here that I've acquired through my experience in life. And those are all part of the distracted manifestation of the splintered attention that we have. And when we pull attention inwardly, there's like a unification. All those different voices, they all just like kind of they kind of keep talking, right? You still have a stream of associations going on in your head, but they're not pulling you. They're not leading you anymore, right? Like we're not supposed to get rid of our ego or get rid of our personality because we need it. We need it to interact in the world. But we just don't want it to be leading us around everywhere anymore. We don't want it in control of the ship because it's just fueled by desires, right? And like one of my personalities desires this, a different personality desires something else. I might have one personality that wants to get up in the morning because I have an exam in school, but the other personality says, "Oh, I'm gonna just have one more beer, and then I'm going home and going to bed after that." Well, what happens? Well, I stay up too late. The next morning, a different personality has to deal, a different self, a different I has to like deal with it. So our situation, as long as our attention is all splintered like this, is that we're just a waif of whatever the wherever the world pulls us. Whatever happens in the world just pulls us this way and that.
Yeah, that's very true. And I guess a lot of this conspiracy stuff, it's in the same vein. Some people they call it distractions. And they'll use words like that, or a lot of the alien stuff could be similar distractions.
Yeah.
Just things trying to kind of keep us off. And it doesn't even have to be that. Like maybe your job or just somebody in your life that's become like, they'll use the term psychic vampirism. Somebody that's, kind of getting to you in some subtle way. It's hard. It's hard to detach from all these things. Part of it is we got to make money and we have to survive, and some of us put too much of ourselves into making money. Where like I said at the beginning of the show, all work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy
Oh
because you're
yeah.
not. Yeah, you got to have some time to. Maybe this is the original reason why they say go to church on Sundays, because at least that way you're devoting. I mean, even though there's somebody up there leading you, and some people see that more as being a sheep, at least you are devoting 1 to 2 hours a week on some type of spiritual agency, which
Mhm.
can't be the worst thing in the world. Oh, but earlier we had a question. I kind of missed it. I apologize. I think the gentleman that asked this question has left, but he's asking about someone named Boyd. Does that ring any bells, Boyd?
Oh, is that Jen? I see. Is it Boyd Rice? I bet he's asking about Boyd Rice. What does he
Boyd
want to
Rice.
know about Boyd?
Yeah, I think he got caught up in something else and left us. Any opinions on Boyd?
So do you know who Boyd Rice is?
I wish I did. I wish I did.
So he's a industrial musician who's been around since the 80s. Um, he has a musical project called Non, and I would say he's like one of the early people, along with like Throbbing Gristle, like one of the early artists that did what today we'd call like noise genre, right? Like music that just like sounds like noise and is like
Hardcore sort of
irritating.
stuff.
Like no beats or anything, just like you know, uh,
Gotcha.
yeah, just like fucking noise.
Maybe like a Cannibal Corpse sort of idea.
No, that's got a rhythm. That has a rhythm and guitar. That has a rhythm and
Gotcha.
that has guitars in it. No, like just like the sound of a trash compactor or feedback, like really irritating feedback. Yeah, just like
Interesting.
noise genre. Yeah. Um, and so he was in the Church of Satan, and he met Anton LaVey at a very interesting time, which is the 80s. During this time period, after um, after Aquino and TOS and those people had left the COS, and Anton was kind of like, he did, Anton did like inactivate the national grotto system, and he stopped like bringing people into it, and he just sort of like settled on the COS as just like my personal vehicle of expression. And at that time in the 80s, Boyd met um, Anton. They both lived in San Francisco. If you go find my podcast, he talks all about this. I take him back all through. I want to know the history of all this, how this went down. Um, and they were both artists. So Boyd does all kinds of artwork too. I just focused on his music because I knew him in the '90s when I was a touring musician. It's like we'd crossed paths with him a couple of times, and so he also did other art, and he met Anton at an art showing because Anton would go to art. He was into crazy art and stuff like that. He used to be very active and well known in the underground San Francisco scene, and so they got to know each other through that. And during this time period where Anton was like really in this, he was in a period of solitude, I think I would say, as far as like the occult world goes, and Boyd would go visit him, like have these weekly visits with him where they would sit around and talk. And Boyd recently published a book, or a few years back, he published a book on this where he has like some of these conversations and some of those experiences are in it. And that's when I had him, on the podcast. So he's a very interesting guy.
Yeah, that is interesting indeed. I'm gonna have to check out that music genre. On that topic, though, you had mentioned that you were in a band. What was the band
Yeah.
called again?
Okay, so in the '90s, I was in a goth band called Morphine Angel.
Morphine Angel. All right.
Morphine Angel, and we put out a couple of CDs. We had some independent record deals. It's like the time period that we were doing this was when it's like during the rise of the internet, like and like some people had websites, some people didn't have websites. We didn't get around to having a website. There wasn't really social media yet, so like if you Google like Morphine Angel, you'll find some stuff out there for it, but the footprint is very light. Although at the time we did quite a lot. We toured nationally. Um, we toured in Australia. We did an Australian tour in 1994, and I was a bass player there. And then I ended up moving to Houston in 1998, which is where I still live now. I kind of settled down here, but then I did another project called Asmodeus X, which was more industrial EBM, kind of electronic dance club oriented music with a dark theme to it. And we did a couple of CDs there, and then I got out of music for almost a decade. I just didn't do anything. I just worked secularly, and worked on other projects and wrote books and stuff. And I just started then, I don't know, about 8 or so years ago, I started doing music again, but just acoustic. I realized that doing electronic music had kind of left me sort of um, separated, sort of
So
disconnected.
when you say doing music, do you mean you mentioned acoustic? Were you a guitarist or a bassist or a singer or what were
Acoustic
you?
guitar, yeah. I came back and
Gotcha.
I've always played acoustic guitar like since I was a child. I played like the viola in the orchestra when I was a kid growing up, and then when I was a teenager, I started playing the electric guitar. And there's a bunch of bands in there that I was in at the time, too numerous to mention on here. But I mean, that is to say that music has always been something very, very close to me. And I've also been always very attracted to to the prophets and the magi who used music as a teaching tool, and that would be like Anton LaVey was musical. Zarathustra is a musical prophet. He sang the Gathas, sang his teaching out. Milarepa in Tibetan Buddhism is very musical. He sang and left like thousands of songs. Gurdjieff is another spiritual teacher I'm very akin to, who is very musical. So, and music can be a very deep and profound experience.
Yeah, definitely. One thing about me is I've liked metal music and things like that, and a lot of the imagery can be darker. A lot of it has to do with the devil and things like that. Do you feel that you have these guys, they're like real Christian fundamentalists, and they'll take a bunch of records and burn them and things like that. What do you think of that? Can certain music be a little bit dangerous spiritually, or is that just a bunch of nonsense?
Um, well, that's a that's a deep question. So, I mean, I love metal music. You know, Slayer, Rain and Blood is probably the ultimate metal album for me. And I grew up listening to Ozzy and Venom and black metal, and I loved all of that stuff. Um, but that music is connected largely with chaos, to put it simply. Music does reflect more or less, can reflect order more or less, or chaos. And I'm not sure if people will listen to uh, chaos music because they feel chaos inside, and so it resonates, and maybe it encourages that. Whereas, like, you listen to Beethoven or something, or Bach is like very is there's something more orderly about it, yet it doesn't feel constricting in any way, at least not to me. So I do think that music does partake of of these sort of principles. Music does partake of principles. Music really traverses the universe between the material world and the world of principles through scales, through the process of scales, which and octaves, which is something that objectively exists in nature. Like vibrations go through this series of like seven steps, and then restarts, remanifests at a higher level within the same note. And that's, someone didn't just make that up. It's like, it's objectively, that's like how notes exist in the world. So there's something objective about music. At the same time, it doesn't really do anyone good to come in and forbid them from like listening to certain kinds of music, because then they're just going to want to hear, what it is. One thing that is certainly true is that everyone has to put everyone has to put the pieces together for themselves. Um, like, if I'm banging a gavel about anything with the book, I'm banging the gavel about meditation being like the good thing that people might want to try. But at the same time, I'm very aware of the fact that, I mean, that you can't force people to meditate, or coerce people to meditate, or convince them that they should, or else something bad is going to happen, or that it'll save them if they do it. People have to feel some inner call to it, and voluntarily be able to try it. I'll say this, that volunteerism versus coercion, to me, this is the essence of good and evil. And I do think good and evil exists objectively. I'm not a moral relativists. I do believe that there is a objective good and evil. But to me, evil lies in coercion, the use of coercion, and the use of force on people. And that volunteerism, the voluntary act, is in alignment with the good, in that it's like nothing is harmed for it. Like people talk about altruism and charity all the time. Is it good or is it bad? And it just comes down to coercion versus volunteerism. If you voluntarily are like helping other people because you want to help them, because you love them, because it helps you experience love within yourself, then yeah, that's a good thing. Go for it. But what is not right is to coerce people and try and force people into being altruistic, to force people into, you know, surrender your money so we can save the poor, or go give to the poor, or else you'll be on the church's shit list or whatever. You know what I mean? So to me, it all comes down to coercion versus voluntarism.
And we have another question from the chat from Solar. Should the initiate aspire to higher and higher degrees of order, reducing entropy, or is a balanced approach the most generative long term? Question mark.
That's a good question. I think it's all about seeing. You know, it's like, as much as I've talked about, like, the influence of chaos in life, and struggling with desires. So the fact that you still have desires, and the fact that you still experience chaos in the world, is needed, because the game isn't about eliminating all chaos in life, because we can't really do that. But that chaos gives me this opportunity to see myself. So it's really all about seeing, and about trying to see yourself as you really are, in the moment, in a present moment. And this is why I talk about coming back to the body, coming back to physical sensation, because your body is what connects you with presence. The mind can always be, worried about the future, ruminating over the past, but the body is always in the now of time. It's in the moment of time. So I reconnect with my sensation of my body. I'm always brought back into the moment of now. And the more that you do that, the more you feel, you start to develop, a different quality of attention, a different quality of feeling. And that's where they talk about, like in these other systems they talk about, so this starts to create another body within you, astral body, or a Kestia body, subtle body, something that can can survive beyond, can live beyond the carnal body, which is, we know the carnal body is not going to last. We know that everything that exists in this world is not going to last forever. So to me, it's all about seeing.
Any thoughts on Lucifer?
Yeah, he sounds like a cool guy. So Lucifer was really hot, like about 5 years ago. He was really hot. Luciferianism was on the rise. A friend of mine, Michael Ford, who lives in Houston here, started a. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's one of the early proponents of Luciferianism. I mean, he was one of the first people I knew that was using that term, Luciferianism, very prolifically. And he started a Church of Lucifer in Spring, Texas. This is all in the pre-COVID era, He bought a storefront. They had a storefront out there, um, and it ended up creating more problems than anything else. But um, Lucifer kind of to me, I'll tell you what Lucifer represents to me. It represents this principle of of leaving, of exiting from a group. Um, I used to use this term. I have a podcast somewhere where I use this term, Luciferian exodus. That we all go through these experiences in life where we're trying to find people who know what's going on, right? We're trying to find the right people. Then we also go through experiences in life where we realize we're with the wrong people. We're on the wrong bus. You know, I had a when I was in high school, I had one of those like you had one of those counselors that come in and give us a talk about um, stay off drugs kind of stuff. And one of the things that this counselor says was show me your friend and I'll tell you who you are, because we end up being like the people that we hang out with. So sometimes we realize that we need to cut it off with people that we're hanging out with, and this maybe happens a lot more when we're younger. The younger we are, the more we find ourselves falling in with the wrong crowd and stuff like that. And I can say that's true for me throughout my life. I went when I was doing the band stuff, the touring band stuff. I definitely, you know, I I ran into some really dark characters during that time period. Even outside of all of the Satanism stuff we've been talking about, I met some dark characters during that time period, and became associated with some dark people that I look back on retrospect led me to some dark places. So to me, the Luciferian exodus, the Luciferian vibe, means hey, sometimes you got to cut it off and leave, because that's like the myth of Lucifer, that he's like, fuck this bullshit with how things are going down, with the angels of the Lord. I'm gonna go find my own way. So that's what that story is like always kind of meant to me. So Luciferianism, as that was going on a few years ago, back when it was hot, um, kind of took, in my opinion, took a lot of like sort of like Gnostic themes and stuff like that, and kind of like took a Luciferian, utilized Lucifer as sort of the figurehead for this. And at the time when that was happening, I was like, that's cool, whatever works for you. But for me, I was already kind of familiar with a lot of the ideas through like other sources. So now, calling it Lucifer now wasn't really gonna help me that much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of um, Lucifer, fallen angel, and spiritual beings, angels, gods, demons, asuras. There's a million different names for them
Yeah.
in every culture. How do they fit into the grand scheme of things? Are they ultimately just more distractions for us?
Oh, it's a great question. Um, all of these systems that we've been talking about have, beings like that. All of them have this idea of a central causal force or force of consciousness, right? That is like singular, and then there's something like descending from that as a degradation occurs that we were talking about earlier, that leads down to the world. Somewhere in there seems to be like these beings in there which are kind of that world and kind of this world. And so what is that? you know Demons, angels, extraterrestrials, maybe. um I think that uh Zarathustra, the Zoroastrian system, I think, has like one of the cleanest models for this. and it's in the term the Fravashi, which is the same, which means like it's the same thing as like an angel, but it's also refers to the human soul and the idea that we have a pre-soul, and we all start out like basically with the Father, right? Ahura Mazda, Lord Wisdom. We all start out with him, and we all gain a sense that in this other world over there, there's something wrong is going on. There's some evil force or some chaotic force that's like affecting the world, and it even kind of threatens the source of it. It threatens the Father somewhat, and so we decide that we need to go fight and help in this struggle against chaos. So that's how we take birth in into the world. So every person that lives in the world has like come here as a conscious, willful decision. So like what I was talking about before about voluntarism, it's the fundamental nature of human beings that our existence here is a voluntary act. And so the end game of life, then what happens after life, is the idea that when you go through a process of reconnecting these wires like we've been talking about within yourself, then when you leave this world, your um, your Fravashi self is what ascends up into that, into the realm of the what they call the Yazatas, which is basically they're all Fravashis or someone who is a person who's gone up there. So in Christianity, like Christianity is church Christians are always weird about like what angels are. Like when I was young, I was like, you know, going to church asking, you know, the silly questions that children ask. It's like, well, angels, is that like where our souls go? Are those all souls that were on earth? And there's always the response was kind of, well, not quite, you know, we're not really sure, and you know, don't think too much about angels. But no, that's basically what they are in Zoroastrianism. That's exactly what angels, what they are. They're souls of ascended people who've gone through the process of existing in this world and gotten their shit together enough that they've ascended. Now, Sanatan Dharma, which is a branch off from that and into the Eastern systems, gets into this idea of reincarnation. That sometimes the soul leaves, and the soul's like, well, it didn't get something that it needed down here, or maybe it wants to come back for some, so it comes back, and so it opens the door to the possibility of like, you know, reincarnations and stuff like that. But most all of these systems have this idea that before all of these souls that come down, there's there's the Father that's the unity, and then for some reason, as he's like the Father needed to extend himself out, and so then he became three, which survives in Christianity as the Trinity. In Sanatan Dharma, it's Brahman, Shiva, and Vishnu is like kind of this triad. You see these triads in these other systems, and then it goes to seven beings, which I think in Gnosticism, I think it's seven archons. You see seven beings and these other things. So it's like one, three, and seven, and those are all very significant numbers. Any kind of occult system spends a lot of time on those numbers, and those are all like the descending part of it. And then the thing is that there's a ascending force or a descending force, which comes down from the Father in the universe. Descending force. Sorry, my hands off camera. And then there's an ascending force. So that one, three, and seven, that's all part of the descending force. Or in Taoism, it's Yang, the Yang force. And then the ascending force, which part of that is help. That's part of the help that we as humans come down here to give back to the Father for the maintenance of the universe. That's the ascending force. That's the Yin force in Taoism, or in the Yin Yang, that rises upwards. And part of what you experience through uh, second awakening, and I talk about this in the book more, is that you become aware that these forces are moving through you, right? Becoming aware of these forces moving through you. Like almost every, I mean, who's not aware of yin and yang? Everyone's aware of that as an idea, but we need to take it to that the next level of like actually experiencing and feeling these forces moving through us, and then it starts to take us somewhere.
Gotcha. What do you think about the idea of a demiurge from Gnosticism?
So yeah, so man, Gnosticism is really hot right now, dude. Luciferianism was hot, like Luciferianism is kind of 20 it's kind of 2016, and now it's Gnosticism, archons and the demiurge. So I read the Nag Hammadi library. I discovered that book in 1992 or 93. And there's a lot in there. And first off, there's different ideas about Gnosticism. There's different sects of Gnosticism. And the way people are talking about it more and more, they're talking about it like it's like this really coherent thing where there's like, there's the Sophia and then the Demiurge and then the Archons and all of this kind of stuff. But the idea of the Demiurge is, to me, this is like the idea of it's the delusionary force, kind of that idea that we've been talking about, that there's like a Maya or something like that, that there's a force of delusion which misleads us away from things, and that our whole aim is to try and like disconnect from that, and the only way we can really do that again is with an internal sort of thing. But Gnosticism is like another great example. All of the key elements that we've talked about tonight, I think you can find within Gnosticism as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's certainly a lot of crossover there, and yeah, like you were saying with Luciferianism, a lot of Christian types will kind of just group them all together and call me evil. Do you get a
Yeah.
lot of well, actually, I heard you kind of mention this in one of your videos, but you mentioned being attacked by trolls. Why would they target you? Are these like really closed minded people, or just people that are like maybe a little jealous, that sort of stuff?
I don't know. I mean, there's always trolls for something, and it's like, I've like put myself out there to an extent, and that's part of the call that I have experienced, has like kind of led me in that direction. And the reality is that that this is just what you experience as you go through that. So um, my social media, I got trolled more on Facebook, I think, than anything else, and so I've like left Facebook. I left Facebook probably about a decade ago, and I think part of it has to do with Facebook is just really it's just really monitored and compromised by government agencies and the deep state and stuff like that. And so there's like a lot of encouragement for behavior like that. But I'm mostly on um, X right now, at Damonosophy on X, or Paul Fredric, and TikTok. I've kind of re-energized my TikTok over the last year or so, and it pretty much left behind Facebook and Instagram for as far as social media goes. It's just it's all these things are just part of the world that we live in right now. And it's like you were talking earlier, the world like moved you in a certain way to put your stuff out there, and then for a while you didn't. And I've gone through the same thing. I took a year off from doing podcasts and just started doing them again. I guess about 5 months ago or so, I started podcasting again. But I took a whole year off it because it wasn't doing anything for me, and I just needed to rethink and re re reboot, recenter.
And that's something that's not really a bad idea, especially if you just feel kind of burnt out. It's good to reconnect with the whatever got you into it in the first place, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm doing. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going back to the art of the interview, if you want to
Hmm.
call it that, because that's always been the meat and bones of this program, and it's easy to get distracted and get into other things, but um, I've really come to reconnect with this being a big part of who I am. But I definitely appreciate you coming on, Paul. Um, I have other questions and other things, different routes we could go down, but I don't want to drag you down a 5 hour rabbit hole or anything like that. Let's save some for the part two or the sequel.
Yeah,
But for
let's do it. Let's do a part two for sure.
Absolutely, I'm really enjoying myself here. It's good to talk to you. You seem like a very real person, which I definitely appreciate, and I think we've had some similar experiences. But why don't we go ahead and take a moment and just let you hop up on the soapbox if you so wish, step behind the podium, and just kind of say whatever you'd like to say to my audience out there, and please follow that up with anything and everything you'd like to promote or plug. Please do that now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was saying earlier, you find me at on X. I'm at Damonosophy, or you could just search Paul Fredric, and you can look for Paul Fredric on TikTok or YouTube, and stay connected with me there. The website www.ibeelzebub.com. Why it's called Beelzebub is a whole other story. We'll have to go into at another point. It's kind of it being retooled right now, though. I'm kind of in a transitional point with the website, so we're kind of working on that. And the new book is Second Awakening, an experiential exegesis of the secret of the golden flower. This is the one that I highly recommend. My book before this was called The Nebu Generator, which I got it out in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID, and I told people it's all about the magical power of gold, which anyone who like listened to who got the book and listened to me and got some gold back then is really happy right now with the way the price of gold has gone in recent days. So and there's some other books out there, but really this is the one that I'm hoping to change the world with right now. So Second Awakening, look for that. Follow me on X. I have a Patreon account. It's kind of inactive, but I'm looking at reactivating that sometime in the next few months when I have the right kind of people assembled for it. And so that's where we are. So, Daniel, man, I want to thank you for like having me on. It's been great to connect with you. Like I said, I feel we kind of like distantly touched a long time ago, and it's like finally come full circle, and I feel a sense of completion for this.
Oh, well, I love that. It was truly meant to be. Like I said, you're our first guest back after a year, and boy, were you great. So thank you so much, Paul. I definitely want to have you back on again in the future, see what you're up to, whatever your latest findings are, your research, your experience, the spiritual road that you're on, which is incredible. Again, definitely some synchronicity going on tonight. But until then, sir, thank you so much, my friend. I will talk to you next time.
All right, thank you. Keep the dark fire burning.
All right. That was Paul Frederic. Great guest, great conversation, very enlightening. And that's exactly what we're looking for with this program. Um, you know, Paul had mentioned certain fads out there in the truth spiritual community. I don't even know what to call it at this point. I think at first it was probably called paranormal radio, and then it became podcasting, and I've seen things just kind of morph and change over the years. And there's a lot of things that become popular, and you kind of see it float around the circuit of podcasts and YouTube channels and things of that nature. And it's really a sight to behold. Some small part of me feels like I played some part in it all, getting things going. End of Days Radio was one of the first programs of this nature. And I feel like this program has also kind of helped go from, more basic paranormal stuff like UFOs and ghosts, down to some more serious esoteric discussions. And the esoteric stuff seems to be uh, kind of popular right now, and I hope that I played some small part in that would definitely be a great thing to have taken some part in. Maybe I shouldn't use this word, but illuminating humanity, and I mean that as a positive illumination and not a false illumination or anything like that. If any of them are false, um, definitely that. I'm glad I shared my story with him, my meditation story, because that's something that I've thought about endlessly, and it came full circle there. I was like, I don't know if these are demons. He's like, these are demons indeed, and that makes a tremendous amount of sense. Um, that kind of goes back to the Gnosticism thing, the idea of there being archons and things like that. Oh, I'm sipping my coffee, and it's turning my teeth brown. It's so disgusting. Let me turn my camera off and just kind of wipe that off, if you don't mind. Just give me a moment here. There we go. I got to sip something while I'm doing the show. And unfortunately, coffee and tea and things like that are my go-to because they kind of open up my breathing and, get me sort of in the mode for thinking and podcasting and saying things and things like that. Yeah, somebody mentioned I got rid of the pirate flag. Yeah, I got rid of the pirate flag. That's something that I could easily bring back. I kind of wanted to get away from that because like a few different reasons. One, I'm not a pirate. I'm not pirating anything. I'm not hawking software or anything like that, or video games. The other thing is that piracy and things like that are really associated with the Illuminati, and people that are quick to jump to conclusions. They'll see that and they'll think, oh, that's him signaling that he's actually an agent, or he's part of a secret society, or he's a Mason. Some people like to do that. They like to accuse each other of being Masons. Excuse me, I turned my camera off. I'm just getting some juice. I get thirsty. This room is very hot and dry. That's going to be a problem. I'm going to have to figure something out. But a lot of people associate that stuff with masonry, and there are some connections there. Don't get me wrong. Skull and Bones, the fact that piracy in general was funded by these secret societies and bloodlines from the very beginning. But my pirate flag was the spirit of rebellion and the spirit of freedom. It really never meant any association with that stuff. So I got kind of a different setup now. I got my books back there. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that stuff. I got a little screen that's flashing. I meant to change that and put the guest on there, but I had Seahawk stuff on there. And then the Bigfoot sign, the alien, which was given to me by a good friend, movie director Max Cole. And then to the left of that is a LED Saturn sign, but you can't see it. If I fool with the lighting, maybe you can see a little bit more. No, the lighting is completely blocking you from seeing it. It's overpowering it, so it just looks like a blank space. But there's actually a Saturn there. Maybe it's better that it doesn't show up, because I'd have a lot of the same problems with that I had with the pirate flag. So we'll see how that goes, if I can get that to actually show up. Otherwise, I'll get rid of it. I'll replace it with something else. But at least there's not a bed behind me. That's a major improvement. I'm in a better place now with more room. So I actually have a room to dedicate as a studio, to dedicate to podcasting. Man, there's so much stuff going on in the world, and so much stuff has come down since I was last on air. It's mind blowing. Obviously, the big thing is the Epstein files, right? We're all waiting for the rest of the Epstein files to come out. When the stuff started rolling out, I was literally glued to my computer screen or glued to the TV. I mean, you can get YouTube and stuff on your TV now if you got a smart TV or the right thing hooked up to it. But I was just waiting and refreshing every so often and getting the latest stuff on the Trump and Epstein stuff, and then it started to turn into like Meghan Markle stuff because there was that, they told us that people were gonna more names were gonna come out, and certain people are gonna be exposed, and then all of a sudden all the focus kind of turns on Meghan Markle, who we've discussed a lot on this program. I always found the whole Megxit thing hilarious. Her rebellion and her accusations of racism against the royal family, and things took a turn. Boy, all of a sudden I'm seeing that she's actually like a 50, and she's lying about being what she's supposed. She says she's like my age. I'm 43 now, so she's going around saying she's like 44. Really, she's 50. And they're saying like if Harry had known she was 50, he might not have ever wanted anything to do with her. So between that and the Epstein Association, I'm kind of started to see why the royal family didn't like her, and her the way she's always trying to pretend to be Lady Di, like she's taking pictures like Lady Di, wearing the big hats and just whatever clothes that Lady Di was wearing, she seems to be mimicking. Like she's and then I find out that she had like this board in her room, a vision board that ended with her like becoming marrying Prince Harry and like becoming this new sort of Lady Di figure. Creepy, right? Good looking chick. She was on Suits, enjoyed her character on there. But you come to find out that she's like this, like just this creepy person that comes from the Epstein world, and she's manipulating Harry and just controlling him. And I get it now. I get it. I can see why they don't like her. I see that other perspective on it. Us Americans, when she came over here, we're just like, oh, she wants to be American now. Well, good for her. Enjoy. We like you over here. You're one of us. We have no problem with blacks over here. But then we come to find that she's evil as can be. Allegedly, got to throw that in there. Allegedly, I don't want any lawsuits from the Markle estate, or I guess she would be Sussex because she changed her name to Megan Sussex, and then they took the title away like not long after that. Funny stuff, especially when you factor in Prince Andrew being involved, and probably a lot more of them, because all those royals are very closely tied to the bloodlines. Rothschild. There's that picture of one of the Rothschilds, one of the older, more powerful ones, and he's poking Prince Charles in the chest, like, "You mind yourself." And Prince Charles is just like terrified. You can tell who outranks who there. That picture's brought up a lot in these type of discussions. But yeah, getting back to the Donald, what can I say besides "I told you so"? I hate to say it, but I told you so. All the people that were getting on me, bashing me, coming at me hard. Um, you know, when I got off the Trump wagon, which was hopefully pretty early on, it was definitely during his first term, or pretty early on, I believe, if I remember correctly. I experienced so much hate, so much pushback on that. Oh, what's wrong with you, Daniel? Can't you see that this is the one guy that's really, fighting against the elite and stuff like that? And then here we are years and years later, and we're finding out he's obviously one of them. He's all tied up at Epstein Island. You got a few clinger-ons that are trying to kind of spin things and lie to themselves, is the way I see it. They're saying, oh, he was only there because he was gathering information. He was going to turn Epstein in. He's a secret agent the whole time. But come on, like, based on all these perverted things he said, things we know about him, grabbing the P word, calling women piggy, quiet piggy. Come on, let's let's stop clinging to these desperate attempts to keep the MAGA energy going. And if you're MAGA or whatever, um, that again, I've always said this. I have nothing against you. I am not the type of person that's gonna unfriend people because of their political beliefs. That's childish. Like that's the worst that you could possibly do. That's letting the division that they're purposely putting out there win. But again, I feel vindicated. A lot of people say, "Oh, you don't like Trump because you're from Seattle. Seattle hates Trump." Yeah, Seattle does hate Trump. We hate Trump here, and I've never been more proud of that. I could say, like, for one thing, in this country, what Trump doesn't want you to know is states have specific rights. There's no kings. There's no dictators. All this stuff he's doing, I predicted. If you go back in the timeline and you go and find the show that I did on, I believe it was around New Year's Eve. It was, or a bit before that, I suppose. It was before the election. I said Trump's going to win, and he's going to start abusing his power, and he's going to go outside of bounds, and it's going to turn into a whole thing. I said this with no indication, with no hints, with no prior basically I just pulled it out of my butt, right? I pulled it out of my butt, and I was 100% right. And people will say, "Oh, well, you only knew that because you're compromised. You're part of them. You're a deep state." Nope. If I was deep state, I'd have a much nicer studio. I would probably be shaving, but most of all, I'd be filthy rich. And I'm obviously not filthy rich. I have to work. Work is what caused my health issues, what stopped this podcast for a year. I had to decide for myself what was really important, money or the things we do on here. And I feel like I made the right choice because here I am, I'm back, and I feel amazing. But getting back to Trump, again, I predicted all this stuff. That doesn't mean I'm deep state. The simple fact of the matter is the spirits told me when I woke up one day. That's it. I had some voice in my head telling me this stuff was going to happen. And sure enough, it started rolling out. And I wish they'd tell me more. I wish they'd tell me what stocks to invest in or things like that. But that hasn't happened. So the best I could do is just say, I done told you. I done told you so. He's a Zionist puppet. And all that Epstein Island stuff, it's all tied to Mossad and Israel and all that. I know a lot of you will keep swimming down that river called denial, and you're going to tell me that Trump was trying to report on Epstein and all that. But nope, they were friends, and they were up to some nasty business. And these things are not okay. I'm not gonna go with the Megyn Kelly twist and say it's okay because they're not 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds. No, those are children. These people were targeting children, and that's not okay. I hope so badly that this leads to some prosecution. But knowing the system is trying to go after itself doesn't give me very much hope. I got to give props to Marjorie Taylor Greene for standing up to it, for recognizing there's something wrong, and for jumping off that train. And I hope that others continue to take the same route and stand up to somebody that I see as a blooming oppressive dictator, somebody that's brought a level of fascism to our country that we've never seen before. Trying to punish poor people constantly, going after poor people in every possible way. It is little dumbass followers who are mostly poor themselves are sitting there going, "Yeah, Trump, yeah, take away everything from us." Prices are just going crazy high levels we've never seen before. Nope, the economy is great. Affordability is not a word. Come on. Like how how long are we going to do the emperor wears no clothes thing and keep saying this shit show is okay? It's not. And no, I'm not a liberal. Never been one. I don't define myself as conservative. I don't. I don't go with the left or the right, like I've always said. I just I'm just proud to be able to sit here and say, I done I told you so. And anybody that's still on that bandwagon, I recommend you hop off before it gets even more embarrassing, before we hear more quiet piggies. Who calls somebody piggy? Like people think that's cool. It's a person that's breaking down, that's completely combusting because they're so overwhelmed with the shit that's raining down on them that they themselves are responsible for. That's what that is. And I've been kind of just afraid to really put out how I feel because I had friends that were very MAGA. A lot of psychological external pressure, and I've said how I believe, but I just feel like the gloves are really off now, and everything's coming out, and I love it. I can't wait to see more. But keep in mind, this is still a case of the Illuminati or bloodlines just throwing certain people to the wolves. Meanwhile, they're doing the same things themselves in private company, doing worse things. These were uh, teenagers that they are abusing on Epstein Island, but behind closed doors, there are 5-year-olds being abused and things like that. Let's not lose sight of that and lose sight of the real killer, so to speak, as OJ would say. It's funny hearing our guests talk about Mike Hideous. Uh, I find Mike Hideous to be a hilarious person. I've always thought that, like even like early on when we started having him on, and even to current day. Like I don't know if you guys listen to Michael's show, but uh, a lot of the time he's busting on Mike Hideous, and Mike's just kind of taking it. And this is like the funniest shit ever to me. I don't know why, but I always I'm always sure to right away listen to the episodes where it's the two mics together because I know it's going to be Mike Hideous getting busted on in a hilarious way. And props to him for sitting there and taking it because that could get pretty brutal. But whatever led them to that, that's turned into some gold. So check out the Michael Deacon program if you have a chance, especially any episodes where it's him and Mike Hideous just talking about current events and stuff like that. And on that topic, Mike, like he's a real good guy. He's really nice. He loves animals. Not the sort of person you would think would be a sadist. One thing is he's a huge Trumper and huge conservative, which kind of makes the subject matter even more entertaining. Jimmy Kimmel, boy, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to that whole thing, but just about every night he's going on TV and railing on Trump. It's turned into like, he's sort of becoming a little bit of a folk hero, so to speak. I know a lot of people don't like him. A lot of people hated him once Howard Stern started hanging out with him, and they became like the group of cool kids. And a lot of people blame Jimmy Kimmel for doing that, for like introducing Howard to certain people and making him one of the cool kids. They feel like that kind of changed the show and all that. And I mean, I don't know how much of that's really true. To me, Howard just kind of got old. But I've definitely gained a new respect for Jimmy Kimmel, the way he's been going after Trump every night. And his ratings are sky high. Trump keeps talking about him. He keeps talking about Trump. It's turned into a whole feud. And it's drawn a lot of people in. In fact, I'll turn it on or I'll listen on YouTube and I'll think, boy, this still hasn't gotten old. Like he's literally talking about him every night. But he wouldn't be able to do that if Trump wasn't just, talk about distractions. Like, what a shit show. This is your president. This is the guy that you've been supporting and fighting to get elected. Rob Reiner gets killed by his own son. He's going on there and he's making it all politics. Well, he never liked me, so he was being inappropriate. Period. The guy just died, and he's just like every other time somebody's gone against him or said anything, he's jumping on social media like a teenager and just ranting, and people think that's very alpha or it's cool, but it's awful. He's probably got dementia, and he's just a nasty person. Like, one thing that I did is I went back and I watched a bunch of his interviews from like the 80s and 90s. And this guy, let me tell you, this guy was always being groomed to be president from the very beginning. You can tell by the questions they're asking him. He's talking about, we should be charging these other countries for this and that. Like, he was groomed for this role, and he was always supposed to be the guy that would introduce these tariffs and charge other countries and stuff like that. Kind of interesting because he was always kind of marketed like, oh, he's rich. He's rich from real estate, or he's rich. Okay, that's nice, but how did he get rich? Who is he? What's his familial background? Oh, so it turns out that this Trump family, they came over from Bavaria. They got rich through prostitution in Alaska and Seattle. Really? Sounds right in line with the Epstein stuff. The pageants, the teenage pageants and stuff like that. Well, you know what? This isn't a political program, so I'm probably just feeding into the distractions and the demonic by even talking about this, because again, what bigger distraction is there than Trumpty Dumpty? Thanks for joining the live show. Really, thank you. Sorry about my slobbering. It's really dry in here. I know it's gross. I'm trying not to do that. But thank you for showing up to the live show. And I know that we just came back, and it's probably overwhelming in the sense that a lot of people are probably wondering where I was, or if I was going to come back. A lot of people probably gave up on the show, gave up on me, thinking, oh, he's not coming back, he's giving up, et cetera, et cetera. That was never supposed to be. It was just a break I needed for health issues, and because I had some legal issues going on, and I just needed certain things to blow over, and I needed to make a little adjustment to my work life. Again, I was really set on making lots of money, and I'm sure many of you know this, but I've never made like a bunch of money from the show. This has always been kind of like my passion project, and I've always kind of wanted to keep the money thing away from it because I thought it would corrupt it. And there's been times when I try to make the show into something more mainstream, and it always seems to fail, mainly because the topics that we choose to speak about on this program are bad topics. That's what the show's about, and just nothing but censorship and oppression, and not really the type of as a businessman, why would I try to make money doing something like that? Like, that's the worst thing you could try to make money with, unless you're Alex Jones and you're a CIA agent or one of these other platform people that are platformed, as in something's holding them up, holding them in place. But I'm feeling good. I'm sure you guys can tell. I'm feeling good to be back. Really, really good. This is who I am. This is my way of interacting with the world and broadcasting. So I can promise you guys, never again. You know how Israel says we're never going to concentration camps again? Never. I'm never going to quit broadcasting again. That's my promise. Never again. You won't do this to us. Zion forever. I'm just kidding. They don't even say that. That's stupid. Yahshua forever. That's better. But yeah, that's everything. We went about 2.5 hours. I think that's good. I could easily stretch this out to 4 or 5 hours, but like I said, that's just too much for me. I apologize for those that are expecting that, wanting to go deep into the night. But for me to keep doing this and to stay healthy and all that, I just can't do that to myself because, like I said, I gotta work too. But one thing I'll never do again, I'll never put you know, making those greenbacks over doing this show, because truth over currency always. You know what currency does? You know what wealth does? It just makes you busier because you have to maintain that wealth and you're always going to want more, right? You get that car you want, you get the house you want. It doesn't take long until it's not good enough anymore. Oh, yeah, I actually am not satisfied with the Corvette. I want an electric car. Oh, this house is starting to feel so small over the years. If only I had an extra room where I could put like 50 fish tanks and watch those little fuckers grow. People have thoughts like that, but it just leads to nothing. You get more money, you get more responsibilities, and it just turns into a bigger, more gigantic heap of shit. It turns into a corporation. What are corporations? They're just big, bloated heaps of garbage. Buy locally, homestead, take care of you and your own. Do what's good, do what's right, educate yourself, stay away from stupid shit like partying endlessly and drugs and violent habits and um, stay away from stupidity and lower vibrational thinking. I'm glad to be back, and I hope that this is the beginning of something very special. And it is, because this is the End of Days Radio, and this is the continuation of something very special. I don't even want to get off air. That's how excited I am. Like, I'm sitting here and I've run out of stuff to say. I've run out of notes, but I'm having such a hard time pulling myself away because I love you. But thank you so much to our guest that came on tonight. Please check out his stuff. Check out his book, The Second Awakening, on Amazon. And yeah, I'm still working on my book, but the subject matter has drifted and it's changed. I hate to say it. I didn't release it fast enough, and I went down different avenues, and I've learned other things. And how can I not include the new stuff? So the book's still coming out. It's just going to be a little different than the original premise. And see you next week. Hey, I don't know who's coming on yet, but I promise you it'll be somebody delectable, and the content will be delectable. So in advance, I say bon appetit. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the wind beneath my wings. This is Daniel signing off from that itty-gritty Emerald City in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Hit my theme music. Hit it.